This is the Bringing Business to Retail podcast with today's guest, Jaime Lieberman.
Welcome to the Bringing Business to Retail podcast on SelenaKnight.com. Stay ahead of the competition by opening your doors to business experts so you can learn, grow, and be inspired. Passionate about bringing business strategies to independent retailers, please welcome your host, Selena Knight.
Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of the Bringing Business to Retail podcast. I'm Selena Knight, your host, the retail strategist, and today we're going to learn, grow, and be inspired all about influencer marketing. Jaime Lieberman is going to dish us the dirt on all the questions that you've probably had about using influencers to grow your brand. Now, I'm recording this just before I run out the door to the Mumbrella 360 conference. And it is a marketing conference here in Australia that is cutting edge. Let me just share with you a couple of the things that I'm really looking forward to seeing. The first one is building credibility to connect with youth audiences, how brands can connect with an urban youth audience in an authentic, genuine, and credible way. It's actually perfectly timed for the retailers who are inside of Scale Your Store Live. And I'm going to be doing a couple of Facebook Lives live from the event, because inside Scale Your Store Live, this week we are talking all about connection. So I guess that's why that particular keynote has grabbed my attention. I'm always looking at ways that brands can connect with their audiences, because connection is something that can't be faked. Connection is the thing that builds your brand and makes it so completely different to everybody else. And the next one that I'm looking forward to has a really catchy title called An Ad Guy and a Psychologist Walk Into a Campaign. And it is a psychologist, Dr. Mel Weinberg, and an ad guy, Dan Monheit, and how they use behavioral economics to explain some of the most profitable marketing campaigns of all time. I am fascinated with psychology and behavioral psychology and how you can use it inside of marketing. It's just one of those things I love to read about. I love to dig in a little bit deeper. And so as a result, I think that is going to be one of the top of my list. I'm really, really excited. And of course, video takes a stand as well. There are a couple of sessions all about video and how you can use it to scale your business, especially if you're an already established business. And you know, I love video. So as much as it's probably a little bit late for you to come along to the Mumbrella 360 conference, I will pop a link to Mumbrella 360 because they do a range of events for a whole bunch of different audiences, including Mumbrella Retail, which is at the beginning of next year. Now, connection is made easier with people like brand influencers. And today's episode with Jaime Lieberman is going to dig into the questions that you've probably had lurking in the back of your mind about how to use an influencer, how to find an influencer, how you pay an influencer. So you are not going to want to miss out on today's episode. Now, today's episode, speaking of customers, acquiring customers, customer connection, it is really important for you to know the value of a customer to your business and not just the acquisition cost, what that customer is worth to you over the whole life cycle that they shop with you. So today's episode is brought to you by my customer lifetime value calculator. It is a little calculator where you can punch a few numbers in and work out the true value of what a customer is worth for your store. Have it for free over at SelenaKnight.com/lifetime. Okay, let's jump in to today's episode with Jaime Lieberman. Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Bringing Business to Retail podcast. We have all seen the stories of product brands that have been featured by people like Kim Kardashian, and we wish that could be us. We wish that we could just get a celebrity to take our product and flash it all over Instagram. But the fact is, that is not the beginning or the ending. And there's a lot of technical stuff as well as legal stuff that we need to put in place before we use influencer marketing. So I have influencer marketing expert Jaime Lieberman on the show to share her tips and tricks and strategies to make sure that this avenue works for you. Welcome to the show, Jaime.
Thanks for having me.
influencer marketing, like 5 years ago, this was not a phrase. It just wasn't, celebrity endorsement was the sort of words that people used, but it's always seemed out of reach to your average small business. So tell us a little bit about, one, how you ended up in this space, but I'd also like to know about how small businesses can actually use influencer marketing to grow their brands.
So I've been in the blogging space for, as we like to say, I'm almost a relic, for a very long time. I've been blogging since the early 2000s, long before anyone even had thought the name influencer or had been paid a penny for their blog. And as I blogged, it was more personal. And as time went on and more people started blogging, I started looking around and realizing, there's something here. And so it has certainly evolved over, I'd say, the last 5 years or so into what it is now today. And it's constantly changing. I've worked for influencer networks, which are networks that will bring influencers that may have similar subject matters together and connect them with brands. Mm-hmm. I've worked at influencer conferences where they bring brands and influencers together to talk solely about the business of influencer marketing. And the biggest thing I see is it's not just for the big brands. There are some unbelievable relationships I see from some of the smaller bloggers and some of the smaller brands. And frequently what I see is when it's a really good natural fit. So if you're a business owner and you want to do some outreach to some influencers, my number one piece of advice is to get to know them. Look at their sites, look at what they're doing, see that it's an organic fit and it makes sense. The biggest complaint that I hear from influencers is when they're approached by a brand, not necessarily that may not have a very large budget, but the brand just wouldn't fit. It doesn't make sense. So if you know your space and you know who your customer is as a business owner, then you'll also know what they're reading and what they're interested in. And if you make that connection and make that very personal connection, I have seen influencers that are willing to work with brands who may not have the largest of budget because they know these influencers that the readers will love the product. And so that's a really great way, is working with a small number that you've really spent some time getting to know.
And they don't just have to be big. You don't have to go after Kim Kardashian right at the beginning, do you?
I actually think you do better with some of the more niche bloggers. I always recommend to brands when they're sort of making their entry into influencer marketing is not to focus on the numbers. Focus on engagement. See how well the audience, the influencer's audience, takes the influencer's advice, see how engaged they are in that influencer's community. You can see, the fact is now you can buy followers. It is a sad practice that
sad
happens.
Reality. Yeah.
It's terrible and it's frustrating for those influencers who's been working for so long and have really authentic audiences. And so look at not just their numbers, but look at their engagement. I think that is the most important thing, because you're going to get a way higher return on investment with a blogger who may have a few thousand followers, but those few thousand followers buy every single thing that blogger recommends.
And not only that, working with someone who only has a few thousand followers has to be a lot cheaper.
It can be. It depends, to be honest. Some of them who do have very sort of small subjects, they can command a little bit more. For example, hyperlocal influencers. There's a very popular hyperlocal influencer where I live. And where I live, by its very nature, there's going to be a cap on the number of parents where I live. And that's who this influencer targets. But every single thing this influencer says, people go do. And so their rates are a little bit higher. But I also know, because they're my client, that they are willing to work with brands for less if they strongly believe in what the brand's doing or they think it would be a great fit for the audience.
How do you recommend that a brand approaches an influencer?
Email or a phone call. I would typically try to schedule a call rather than just a direct cold call. But I think just sending an email that's very personal that shows that you've read the influencer's website or you've looked at their Instagram, and not only saying what you've read, but why you're interested, why you think they'd be a good fit. I think influencers are a lot more interested and excited to work with a brand who knows what they're doing, because realize that they are getting pitched all the time, and people are always asking them for free things, and they're always asking for exposure, as it's called. So knowing something personal and really making the connection between your product and their audience goes such a long way.
Do you think that it is worthwhile? Say you've found an influencer that you want to work with, and you've reached out, and they send back their pricing or their information or however they want to work with you. Do you think it's worthwhile to go and find other brands that have worked with them and see what the outcome is or was?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of the bloggers that I work with now have case studies, and I think brands should absolutely ask for those case studies, how previous sponsored campaigns have run, what the results were. They should have all of that information at their fingertips, and I think it is absolutely something brands should be asking for and something influencers should have on hand.
Oh, that's a really good tip, because I have to say I've contacted a few influencers when I had my stores, and I don't think anybody ever sent me back case studies. So if you're an influencer listening to this, perhaps that's something you need to be putting together in order to sway your customers a little bit more.
Absolutely. It is so compelling, and I recommend it all the time to clients. And when I go to influencer marketing conferences, it is one of the ways that influencers stand out when you see a great case study, and they're not that hard to put together. All the data's there. It's just a matter of making it look pretty, and Canva is a very easy way to do that.
That's such a good tip, and it's actually one of those things I've just stuck in my back pocket for the next time one of my clients reaches out to an influencer. Make sure you ask for case studies.
Absolutely, they're really helpful.
So once you've approached, your preferred person, and they've written back and they've said, "Yeah, I think we might be a good fit. Here are my rates." What is the next step?
Well, it depends. If you want to try to negotiate, you certainly can. Everything's negotiable. For some reason, I think a lot of people in this industry don't understand that or haven't gotten to that point. But I always say that to both my influencers and my brand clients, that you can absolutely negotiate. Nothing's set in stone. The worst thing that the other party will say is no, and then you can go back to the original offer. But once you've come to an understanding, the number one most important thing I can recommend is to get it in writing. Make sure you have a contract, not just an email.
The thought of a contract has probably just scared everybody, because I'm thinking from the brand's point of view, you're so excited that you're now able to work with this person, and maybe you've done a little bit of negotiation. I know one of my clients negotiated with an influencer to provide an affiliate code, so they had an ongoing revenue stream after the initial post went up. But you're so worried about losing them or offending them or this whole thing falling through, like the fear just kicks in, that asking for a contract seems like you might just be pushing the boundaries. So what's your advice for that?
My piece of advice, when I hear this a lot, and I always say, it's a big red flag to me if the other party doesn't want to sign a contract. It's a business transaction. Money or product is changing hands, and everybody needs to be protected. And so if someone pushes back, if I represent an influencer, if I represent a brand, if the other party pushes back, that's a huge red flag. And you may not want that relationship, because all the horror stories you hear typically come when there are no contracts. And so I understand that fear, but it's a business relationship, and business relationships are governed by contracts, or should be. And so for me, that's just a demonstration of the professionalism and where the influencer marketing industry is going. And I think that there shouldn't even blink an eye.
And is it expensive to get a contract drawn up? And whose responsibility is it?
It really depends. I actually have a company that is specific to influencer marketing, and we offer template contracts for influencers or brands that are starting out. And I also do that custom work through my law firm as well. It typically what we do is we put together a template so that it can be used multiple times. There definitely requires some customization depending on what the arrangement is going to be, but you can absolutely use a template and make sure at least you have the specifics of each deal put in writing and some good clauses in there to protect everybody. If something gets more complicated, especially for the larger deals, because I do work on a lot of large deals for some of my clients, those require a lot more back and forth. But for, a standard blog post, it doesn't have to be all that complicated. It just needs to make sure there are certain things set in writing. It can be either party. I know a lot of influencers who have their own contract because they do work with a lot of brands that are new to influencer marketing. And so it can't hurt to ask if you're a brand that's new to this and you've never done it before. It's okay to be a little bit vulnerable in that way. I think the influencer appreciates the honesty and to just say, hey, this is our first time working with an influencer. Do you have a contract we can use? And if not, there are definitely attorneys who specialize in this area, me being one of them, and they could do that for you fairly easily. It's not that complicated.
Okay, you mentioned it just before, but let's just dig into this a little bit deeper. We have all heard the story of the brand, just a small independent business who has sent product to perhaps even a small influencer, someone who's never done this before, and they've sent the product off several $100s in exchange for a couple of Instagram posts, something like that, and nothing happens. They don't get the product back. They don't get their exposure. What is a person to do? Do you just kind of write it off and go, well, that was a really poor business decision, or should you take it a little bit further?
It depends on the value. You have to weigh the pros and cons of how much it costs and how much it's going to cost in order to try to recoup your investment per se. If it's a few $100s and that's what it would cost to, say, file a claim in small claims court, then you just may have to write that off as one of those bad agreements you entered into. But if it's a very valuable product, it may be worth your while to either send a letter from an attorney, because you'd be surprised at how quickly people respond to letters from attorneys, or if necessary to have to go to a small claims court. But the beauty of having an agreement is you can have contingencies in place for something that may happen, that actually makes it cheaper on the back end in order to be able to recoup your losses.
Oh, give us some examples about that.
Well, if you have an agreement that says that if any kind of lawsuit comes out of this, or you have to go after, say you're a brand and you have to, try to recoup lost product or lost funds, you can shift fees to the other side saying you will have to pay all my attorney's fees, so that on the other side, once you prevail, you'll get that as well. And that it can be really, it can stop somebody from wanting to violate that agreement. And also, like I said, you can have provisions in place where you don't pay the full amount up front. So you may send some product, but you are also promising a payment, and you don't pay the payment until everything is complete. So that's another way, not sending everything up front.
Oh, that is really good advice. And I know that a lot of people have probably just slapped themselves on the forehead and gone, oh, why did I send them the money and the product?
Yes.
Why did I do that? Why? Because it all comes back to that fear, doesn't it? That fear of, I don't want this, to fall through. I want to be associated with that brand. And the contract, the idea of having a contract, like you were saying, this doesn't have to be an expensive task. It doesn't have to be time consuming. You offer templates where people can just download this and I assume just edit them to suit their needs. But it all comes back to running a business. You are not a charity. And as much as it seems like a great idea to hand out product in exchange for exposure, if you're not guaranteed of what the other person's giving you, then it is a really silly mistake to not put this down on paper.
I could not agree with you more. I say it all the time. There's so much fear around contracts. And it's new to me because my background before I had #legal in my law firm was I worked at a huge 1,000-person law firm in Manhattan. And it was just, I worked with very large, sophisticated clients on very large cases, and that was just never a question. And so now moving into a different sort of mindset, I was very surprised by people's fear around contracts. And for me, it's very much of valuing your business and valuing the other party's interests, because everybody's protected if you have it all in writing. And it's even little things. It's not even just the loss of product, but it can be your deliverables. For example, if you're a brand and you say you provide some product and you're also paying someone, maybe you're paying them $500, $600 for some Instagram post or a blog post, you may want to be able to make edits to drafts. And that's certainly something that you can do. You may want to be able to use that influencer's image on your website or your social media. If you don't put all of that into writing, then you lose some of those rights. And it makes everybody knows what the arrangement is up front. And there are just far less issues. And obviously, a contract doesn't guarantee everything. There are certainly times where people fall off the face of the earth and you never hear from them again. There's not a ton you can do. And like you said, sometimes you just have bad debt as a small business owner. It happens to me sometimes with clients. It's just unfortunate. It's frustrating. You become angry. But at the same time, I see far fewer issues when something is put into writing and there are contracts than when there aren't.
I think the whole contract thing just means both parties are going in there with the knowledge that there's an expectation from each person. And I was just sitting here thinking, if you are using an influencer, if you have this contract, you'll have an idea of, like you said, what they're going, potentially what they're going to write, what they're going to feature, when they're going to feature it. And of course, you should be building a whole marketing campaign around being featured by this influencer. So like you were mentioning, if things don't go the way that they're supposed to, potentially you've paid for advertising somewhere else to promote the fact that you were promoted.
Yeah.
And your whole marketing and advertising calendar could be completely thrown out if it all goes pear-shaped.
Exactly. So it just, you know what to expect, and the influencer knows what to expect, because every bit as much as you're relying on the influencer for that exposure, for that engagement with their readers, they're relying on that money as well. That's how they run their businesses. And so I know a lot of influencers, the ones who treat it like a business, who take it very seriously. Their reputations are everything. And they also want to do right by the brands. So when you find the right one, that relationship can pay off so much.
Okay. Can we quickly touch on the rulings that we have to have? I know you've got them in America, we've got them in Australia, about having to disclose paid advertising or sponsorship. Can you just, there's maybe some people here who haven't branched into influencer marketing, and they may get a little bit upset when it says #sponsored on their post. So can you give us a little bit of legal jargon on what we need to do to comply with current regulations?
Sure. So in the US, the FTC governs the disclosures for paid sponsored content. And essentially, the FTC is worried about the consumer. And I always call it the mom test. My mom is in her 70s. She has a flip phone. And so my mom needs to know when she's reading a blog post, who's not technically savvy at all, that blog post, that Instagram post, that video is sponsored. And the technical language used by the FTC is called clear and conspicuous. So the disclosure needs to be front and center. It can't be hidden. It needs to be before any kind of clickable link, where if you're writing a blog post and you're writing all about somebody's product, if there's a link in the blog post where a reader could click it and go to another blog post, your disclosure needs to be before that. So not buried at the bottom of a blog post. #sponsored, like you mentioned, #ad, they work in Instagram or Twitter, but it can't be buried. You know how sometimes we see that like paragraph of hashtags,
Yep.
And in the middle there's a tiny #ad. That doesn't fly either. So it just needs to be clear and conspicuous. People just need to know you can't bury it in small print. You can't have it off to the side. It can't be on a disclosure page that you link to. You just need to do it. And a great way to do it, I think, is through natural language and to just weave it into the prose of your blog post. I'm excited to be working with and partnering with this brand. They've provided me this product so I can talk to you about it. There's easy ways that you can weave it in so it's not sort of this giant glaring ad, but that the reader would know this is sponsored.
I love it. I love it. And I just think that going into these relationships with your eyes open and knowing that that's what the post is going to look like, it's all about expectation, right? You need to know that if they're doing the right thing, that that's what it should look like.
Yes, exactly. Because it's not just the influencer on the line, but it is also the brand. The FTC cares about both. And so they are paying a lot more attention to influencers. I'm sure you've seen some of the horror stories of some of the very large influencers who don't disclose. But the FTC, it's on a lot of their radar. So it's important to both the brands and the influencers that the disclosures are proper.
We have exactly the same thing here in Australia. So pretty much identical in terms of what you have to disclose and where and when you have to disclose it. Is your most common answer to your most common first thing that you say to somebody was, did you have a contract or did you have this in writing?
Yes.
You said it earlier and I was thinking, I have to ask you, is that like the most common thing you say?
It is one of them. A lot of people do come to us with concerns or questions or grievances. And that is always my first question is, can I read your contracts? Because a lot of people come and ask, this happened and they did this, can they do that? And the answer is, I don't know until I read the terms of your agreement, because every agreement is different.
And I bet 9 times out of 10, there's no agreement.
It's not quite that high, but it's higher than I'd like it to be.
Right. And that is why you're here today. You're trying to explain to people that this is not something you should be scared of. This does not mean that you're being a bitch if you ask for a contract. You are just protecting yourself. You're protecting them. You're protecting your brand and even your consumers, your customers.
Absolutely. If someone, like I said before, if someone runs away because of a contract, that's a red flag. That's a blessing that you found this out ahead of time.
So apart from the contract, what would be the one thing, if you could just say, guys, if you're interested in influencer marketing, this is the one thing, apart from getting a contract, that I really wish you would do, what would it be?
I think it goes back to what I was talking about before. If you're a brand and you're really interested in influencer marketing, get to know the influencer. Make sure they're a good fit. Don't just send out 100 emails that are all the same. Spend a little bit of time on the influencer's website, and that will go so far. The influencers will do so much more for you because they'll feel valued, not just, one of 100 people that you've contacted.
And I guess when you do that, when you build that connection, then they're more open to just sticking with the general terms and conditions. Maybe they will look at working a little bit cheaper or taking some sort of agreement or letting you adjust the copy, all these things that you've mentioned. They can actually start to negotiate when they feel like it's working on both sides, not just a business transaction.
Exactly. And you'd be surprised. I've seen influencers who've had sponsored relationships with brands, and then 6 months later, the brand will come out with something new, and the influencer loves the brand so much, the brand may not even pay for it, but they may mention it anyway because they have such a positive feeling about that. And so there's real value to that, is to just making it a partnership.
What you're saying is you need to build some connections.
Yes. We hide behind computers. We hide behind emails and Facebook and the anonymity of the internet. I am a person who gets on the phone. That makes everyone panic. Clients who tell me, I just can't get on the phone with you. And I'm like, you can do it.
You can do it.
There is something that I speak at conferences, and one of the talks I give is about negotiation. It's one of the points I love. I love to talk about negotiation. And the number one piece of advice is get on the phone. Talk about something completely different. You'd be shocked at the connections you can make. It makes everybody human.
I know. I actually did an episode once, which was called Pick Up the Damn Phone.
Yes, I love it. I love it. It's so true. It's so true.
How often do you get, 42 emails back and forth later and you still haven't resolved the problem? Just pick up the phone, people.
It happens all the time. I stop it at a certain point, and I say, because, my clients are paying me by my time. And I'm like, this would be way more efficient and way cheaper if we just got on a call.
Okay, well, you have shared some great information, some great tips on ways that we can protect ourselves as brands and how we can work with influencers. But I have to ask you, what is your favorite store? Or you can even tell us your favorite brand.
Oh, that's a great question. My favorite brand, I'm a fashion person. And so my favorite brand that I always, and they're so minimal, but is Rag and Bone. There's something about their clothing that I just love.
Do you love going into the stores, or are you an online shopper?
So I have small children, so by default, I'm an online shopper. But if I can sneak into a store, I love it.
And why would you go back again and again?
They're just there's something so clean about their look, and it's always, they have, what you're going to get when you go, what the quality is. And I know that it is always going to have a sort of similar aesthetic, even though it changes every season. And I like that.
You like the continuity and the confidence of buying with them.
I do. Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing that. If we have listeners who are thinking, I need one of those contracts, I need Jaime's help, I need to look at influencer marketing a little bit more in depth and make sure that I am protected before I enter into that world, where can they find you?
My law firm is #legal. Our website is #-legal.com. And there you can reach me at Jaime, Jamie, at #-legal.com. We have our other website. I have a partner, which is why I say we, is Business Ease, which is business, ESE.com. And that's where our templates are. We also have a lot of great information, including our podcast, which is the Business Ease Influencer Marketing Podcast. We have some templates and we have courses and lots of great information products that are specific to influencer marketing.
Well, thank you. We'll make sure to definitely link all of those up in the show notes, because I think this is a topic that people listening to, even if they're already working with influencers or if they've been thinking about it, they need to go and really go into this with their eyes open. So thank you so much for sharing all of this information today.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Bringing Business to Retail podcast. You can find all of the show notes over at selinaknight.com. If you found something that you heard today particularly useful, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on iTunes or Stitcher. And of course, feel free to share this episode with someone that you think could benefit by listening to it. Want more retail biz strategies? You can watch the Bringing Business to Retail TV show, where each week I'll answer a question or provide you with a simple, actionable retail biz strategy that you can implement in your business right away. If you have a question or a guest, I'd love to hear from you. Drop my team an email at podcast@selinaknight.com, and I'll see you on the next episode. Have a great week.